pause the recording. And here we go. Okay. So we will get started this way, and then I'll bring the PowerPoint back up. My name is Dominique, and I am the Family Support Manager with Autism Canada. I've been with the organization for almost 5 years. I had to give that a thought here. In October I'll be going on my 5th year. And I've been doing these series with my colleagues, Kara and Bruce, this is our third year, I think. Third year. Yeah. So we will be talking today about IEPs, and I will let Kara introduce herself, and then Bruce can go ahead and introduce. I'm always afraid to say the wrong thing, so I'd rather have you guys introduce yourselves, and then we will start the presentation. So Kara?
I'm prepared for it this time. I'm Kara Diamond. I'm an elementary teacher in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and I'm also a university lecturer in special education, accessible education, and classroom neurodiversity at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto. I've been an educator for, I think this is my 13th year, and I've been writing IEPs all that time, so I certainly have some insights to share on this topic. I'm also autistic myself. I have a podcast, Autistic Tidbits and Tangents, and I wrote a book called The Autism Lens.
Would love it if you could share that in the chat too, so the links to your website, your book, all of that fun stuff in the chat, because I don't think we did that last time. Thank you.
No problem.
Bruce. Hi, Bruce.
Hello. Hi. My name is Bruce Petherick. I am the autistic advocate at Autism Canada, and I've been working here for 18-ish months, maybe a little less than that, but kind of around 18 months. And before that, I was a professional musician, but also I have co-taught at schools, mainly high schools, for the sort of 8 years in Calgary. And I have also been a university lecturer, both Australia and Canada, and I taught at high school and in Australia. So I haven't written IEPs and IPPs, but I have been a parent. Well, I still am a parent. And I don't have a book nor a website or...
Actually, no, you have been published for several things. Bruce has been involved in our Autism Ambassador program since, 3 years now, at least?
Whenever it started.
Yeah, so my first year, so about a little over 4 years. And now as the autistic advocate, he runs the program. So if you were looking for ways to help the autistic community and you want to contribute in some way, shape, or form, please reach out to Bruce Petherick, Bruce at autismcanada.org. And you can certainly join the ambassadors team. One of the criteria, mind you, is that you must be on the spectrum, neurodivergent in some way, shape, or form. And contributions can be made in various ways, various tasks, and they're all fun, right, Bruce?
Yes.
Perfect. I did not mention that I am also a parent of 2 on a spectrum. One is 18 in his last year of school, and my other one is 11 in his last year of elementary, moving on to junior high next year. So the IEP for my youngest this year is very important, because we'll be talking about the transition to junior high. And the IEP for my oldest was also very important, because we need to focus on the community involvement and getting him ready for work. So these are 2 very unique IEPs. They're new for me. So I'm going to benefit from this as well and share from my experience. And I am now going to share the screen. So welcome everybody. Bruce, if you happen to see any any more people join in, can you admit them if you don't mind? Because I won't be able to see them on my screen.
Yes, of
Thank
course.
you. Okay, oops, here we go. All right. So we have prepared, there are some questions that had come in from our clients in our community. And we've listed them on this PowerPoint. I believe that there's 8 or 9 questions. And we will be taking the opportunity today to answer them. So this is us. You will find our information for Bruce and myself. You'll find us on the Autism Canada website. And for Kara, she has plugged in her information in the chat. And I love it when Kara joins us. She's so cool. All right. I'm just going to move this over here. Perfect. So first questions first, what is an IEP or an IPP? What are they used for? Who are they used by? I will let Kara and Bruce take this one.
So an IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan. IPP is the same thing, it's just different terminology from other provinces. Individualized a programming plan, maybe? I'm not sure what it is. In Ontario, it's IEP.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a document that provides a snapshot of your child's strengths as a learner and also some of their developing areas, areas where they might need support. This document can reflect if they are accommodated, which means they're still working at grade level, on grade level expectations, and the things that teachers do to support them support those grade level expectations. So it might be things like extra time on a test or having breaks, doesn't interfere with the grade level work at all. They might also be modified, which means there is a reduction in either the complexity or the number of expectations that they're working on or grade level. And so then the modifications, you would have a list of what is the teacher assessing instead, and what are the teaching strategies, and how will they be assessed. And there's always a list of accommodations for everyone because accommodations help all learners. And sometimes there's also alternative curriculum sections. So if your child, let's say your child is given a device to use, often that comes with training, how to use like a voice to text technology. So there might be goals around something like that, or around self-regulatory skills, communication skills. Those are just a couple of examples of alternative subject areas.
Excellent. Thank you, Bruce. Do you have anything you want to add?
Who are they used by, Cara?
Primarily, they're used by students who have an identification. So there are circumstances where IEPs are developed without an identification. But if your child has an identification that has been reviewed through a process called the IPRC process, which stands for Identification, Placement, and Review Committee. So if your child has been to the first meeting, the identification meeting, and the board has accepted that identification, your child will automatically get an IEP developed by the school.
From what I understand, and Cara, perhaps you can answer this question. As you know, in the past couple of years, I am hearing that there are more and more children with IEPs in the classroom. Are you seeing that increase? For example, last year in my son's classroom, there were 25 kids. Out of those 25 kids, 18 of them had an IEP. Are you seeing a lot, like a jump or an uptick in IEPs?
Certainly when I'm talking to teachers, that is what I'm hearing. And, we can have very large class sizes here in Ontario. So when you have classes of 30, 35 kids, it is not surprising to have, 15 to 20 of those on individualized education plans.
Understood.
And I should say, my experience is in Alberta and BC, and Alberta has similar sort of processes as happens in Ontario, and also certainly the concerns of the number of IEPs, IPPs, specialized learning plans are often called sometimes in Alberta, is concerning from both admin and teaching. I have to share that the local district in which I'm living now, which is Surrey in British Columbia, have a wonderful solution. Is that they don't really use IEPs. Basically, any student who needs an adaptation or accommodation can request it, and it will be done. Either that can be in a formal process and a not formal process. There are still some students with IEPs and IPPs, and they tend to be those who need larger accommodations, more accommodation, perhaps, if I could put it that way. So I'm wondering if we're going to see a difference across the country where a more universal design approach will be used by all accommodation, and that's good teaching practice anyway.
Interesting. Okay, so our next question, and this one's important because for me, because for my oldest, who's now 18, they never used a strength-based IEP with him until I realized what that was about 3 years ago, and that's when we made that change for him. And I wish that we would have started using this type of IEP when he was younger. And so I've made sure for my youngest that this is the kind of IEP that we are using, and that we're focusing on his strengths as opposed to highlighting all of his weaknesses and making it very discouraging for little ones. So Cara, can you explain to us what a strength-based IEP is?
So a strength-based IEP is where any of the expectations, goals in the IEP that are developed first considering what the child already does well, and how can you use that to build their capacity in other areas. So let's say you have a child who is very, very social, very, very chatty. You could have a goal about how they can use their strong social skills in group work to facilitate with the group, you know, who is doing what part for their role, so that they're using that strength to support developing actual group skills. Or you might have a goal that mentions, you know, that they'll use their strengths with technology to complete this piece of writing or to complete a presentation. So you're looking at what can they bring to, and then build on.
Bruce, do you want to add to that?
Cara's explaining these things brilliantly, as of course she does. I think the only thing I would say is that I think it's relatively common across the country that teachers are encouraged to approach the IEP, IPP situation from a strength-based concept, but it's also worth emphasizing that with any interaction you have with the schools, to maybe just remind them that you would like to see a strength-based.
Honestly, I think it does depend. I don't believe, like, when I learned about IEPs, no one told me about strength-based IEPs. It's just something I've picked up over time because I research a lot and I read a lot, and I would expect that teachers coming out of Teachers College now probably are being told about this. I certainly tell the teacher candidates that I teach at the graduate level about strength-based IEPs. But it's possible for teachers who have been working a little bit longer that they might never have received any in-service.
Yes, that's a fair point. I was thinking about a number of school principals, actually, or administrators in Calgary that were changing as a focus over the last couple of years. So your point is quite accurate, that the newer teachers probably are more aware of this. Anyway, it's a good idea to suggest this.
I think, in my opinion, I hope you don't mind, but I have one here. We are now, and we're going to advocate for this throughout these series. And what we are recommending to caregivers is that you include your child in the IEP process. Now, with a strength-based IEP, that process alone is a very positive one. And I've mentioned this in other speaker series with both Cara and Bruce, who know this too well, that until probably last year, I would be going into these meetings and I would feel sick to my stomach and I was nervous, and I would leave and I'd feel like, okay, I know all of the things that my son can't do, but I know that he's capable of doing so much more. And I feel that with the strength-based IEP, that design or that model is really an encouraging one, especially if the student is part of the process, because you're really going to highlight their strengths and talk about, you know, what they excel at and how you can take it to the next level. And they're going to enjoy school so much more, and they're going to enjoy, you know, those opportunities to be able to focus on the things they love, and the things they love are the things that they're strong at. And I feel that it's important to use that as an opportunity for them to thrive and to grow and to empower. That's
I love that.
my 2 cents. Yeah. I don't feel so nervous anymore when I go into those meetings, I'll be honest. I feel more confident.
You've had lots of experience.
I've had experience, but I have you guys too, right? I've been attending all of these sessions, so totally. So we touched on this earlier. What are the requirements to qualify for an IEP? So Cara, you know, you've made it clear as to what that means, but perhaps on this, Bruce, this would be a good opportunity for us to just kind of touch a little bit about the levels of support when we do our, when we have our literacy programs and we talk about levels of support. Did we lose him? Is he still here? Did we lose him?
Oh, I don't know. Sorry, I can't see all the images. I guess.
Okay, we did lose him. Oh, he dropped because of his internet. All right, I'll take the opportunity then. So here I am going to talk about the levels of support. And what we do is that Bruce and I, we teach and we offer a literacy program through Autism Canada, and every single one of our training opportunities, our literacy programs, we touch on the levels of need. So back in the day, we used to have, there he is. We used to have, you know, that the individual diagnosis. So we used to have the Asperger's, and then you'd have the autism, and then you'd have the PPD-NOS, and then you'd have, you know, all of these diagnoses were kind of individual. And now they are all kind of under the ASD umbrella, and they're based on levels of support. So when you're talking about an individual on the spectrum, you're talking about, you know, it's a level 1, level 2, level 3. All levels seem to cross each other at some point or another. I mean, Bruce is the first to admit that, you know, in the morning he could feel like a level 1 autistic, but at the end of the day, he can feel like a level 3. A lot of it is circumstantial, and a lot of it has to do with the amount of stress or the sensory processing or whatever happens throughout the day. So my oldest was diagnosed a level 3. He is now a level 2. I don't know, I'm going to say 2.8. He's doing a lot better. But his sensory processing is extreme, and there are days where, you know, no one could help him and no one can do any, he just needs to learn how to self-regulate, and you know, find, like, the safety plans have to be very unique for him at school. But then there are other days where, you know, he can come across as a level 1. He's very independent, takes the bus on his own. He's got 2 jobs. You know, he's doing super, super well. And the need for support there is much less. Where my youngest one is the opposite. My youngest one was diagnosed a level 1, but on a really overwhelming day, for example, when they've had to merge their 2 classes together and there were 50 kids in one class, it was super overwhelming for him. And he just shut down for like 2 days with a fever, and that was his coping mechanism. This is how he coped with that sensory overload. So the levels of support will vary. But for the most part, the levels of autism are diagnosed as such in order for the child to be able to receive the funding and supports that they need when they're young. So a level 1 is a lesser need of support, where they're independent, where, and unfortunately, these are the ones that fall through the crack because they come across as very neurotypical, very independent. So these are the ones that, that they do require in most cases an IEP, but perhaps down the road when they're in college or university, they may not. It depends on the individual. A level 2 is a bit more severe. I hate to use the word severe, but they require more support. A lot of that one-on-one support, those cues to help with self-regulation where they don't really know how to auto-regulate or self-regulate. So they might have that EA that can come to them and say, you know what, let's go for a walk, because the CA could see that this little one is struggling, or even the older student could be struggling. A level 3 is the need for constant support. They are often they come across as individuals who clearly may not have that opportunity to be independent, but they might blow your mind, like my oldest, and surprise you. But they require a lot more support, almost constant support throughout their life. So when these students are coming to you, and as a teacher, or they're starting school and they're diagnosed with a level of autism, this is essentially to be able to ensure that they get the help that they need, whether it's through school or with funding or with forms of therapy. But again, in one day, they could be, diagnosed a level 1, but at the end of the day, they could feel like a level 3 or come across as a level 3 because of the whole sensory bit. Now, Bruce, when we lost you, I was telling the group that we've already kind of answered this question, but then I thought it was a good opportunity to talk about the levels.
Okay.
And yeah, so as far as, what qualifies for an IEP, yes, if they have an identification, but the needs could vary. The needs are different for every single child, every single student, every individual. Did you want to add to that, Bruce?
Actually, I would always also talk about that. We talk about requirements and they will change province to province.
Mm-hmm.
But my memory also that those requirements change often school district to school district, with the amount of number of people who qualify for an IEP. Kara, do you have an official response about that from Ontario?
Sorry, can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay, I just got a notification that something might be wrong with my microphone. So in Ontario, in all of our provinces and territories, education is established provincially at that level, and there are laws about these things. So anyone with an identification of autism that has been shared with the school board and accepted gets an IEP, regardless of how significant their support needs are or not. Yeah. Sorry,
Okay.
did I answer the question?
Well, no, you did, because I mean, as I said, like, for instance, in British Columbia, ADHD is not.
Oh, yes.
You don't get an IEP for ADHD, where in Alberta you do.
Yes. So each of the provinces also will have their the categories of exceptionality that are recognized. So that is, you can find that by going to the Ministry of Education's website in your particular area.
And that would be the code, right? When I have caregivers that reach out and they'll say, my child has an identification, and they gave them a number, and they throw me this code, and they're asking me, like, what does this code mean? But every province would essentially, so it kind of lists the the exceptionalities. Am I right? Is that what those codes mean?
We don't have codes in Ontario. I know Bruce has talked about codes when you were in
Yeah.
Alberta.
Yeah.
What we have is like the categories of exceptionality are things like a communication exceptionality, an intellectual exceptionality, which might be, you know, an intellectual disability, or giftedness would be an intellectual exceptionality. So we have specific categories. Physical disabilities, multiple exceptionality would be if you have multiple identifications that fall under different categories. Yes, so I think it's six or seven categories in Ontario.
Wow.
And ADHD is not one of them, but often students who have ADHD could informally still have an IEP. But it really does come down to the school.
Agreed. So you did, I have another question. You did.
Don't.
Bruce, you're cutting out.
Oh no.
We're gonna lose him again.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry.
Are you good? All right.
I'm not too sure. I'm getting lots of messages. I think everybody's having problems. Anyway, I was going to say I'm the caregivers in the chat that we tend to be complicating the answers, and just the processes are different. It's important, those differences.
Agreed. Cara, you mentioned giftedness. Now I'm hearing this a lot. A friend told me in Finland, students and employees in general receive the support. Oh, interesting. Sorry.
I agree.
Giftedness. Now, what is the difference between giftedness and I don't know, like, is giftedness considered like a type of classroom, a level of education? Like, can you explain that?
So the basic premise is all students are entitled to, deserving of, the appropriate level of support and challenge. So gifted students are often bored by the curriculum in the mainstream. So they can still be supported in general education settings, but sometimes they can go through material more quickly. They tend to have faster processing skills, more expansive memories. They can grapple with richer content. So you might give them a more challenging book to read for a book report. They might do additional research with primary sources before their peers are doing those things. Like, you basically enrich the content for them. You allow them to, this is a great thing for all students to develop their own projects, but students who are gifted would also often they deep dive into things and do a lot more research just because of natural curiosity. So giving them those opportunities to shine and develop their skills as well. And some of them would also be offered placements in gifted programs, depending on what's available in the area and what the criteria for those placements are. And there are both, depending again on the school board and the area, there are congregated gifted programs, which is like a full-time gifted program. So you'd be in a grade 7 class and everyone in the class has a designation as being a gifted learner. Or you might have a one-day-a-week withdrawal program where it might even be at a different school. They get busing to another school, and that day they are doing like a lot of inquiry learning and things that just enrich their educational experience.
That's incredible. Wow. Well,
That sounds like my schooling. So I was part of a I'm older than everybody else, but we had what was called streaming back in Australia. We had streaming within each class, and there were 3 streams. And then when I was in high school, I was doing gifted through what we call in Canada a GATE program, gifted and talented education. And in fact, I ended up specializing in gifted teaching for a little while, especially technology and music. And it's funny how I'm pretty sure in Alberta, an IEP also can be given for gifted students.
Yes, that would be here because they would get
Yes.
the designation. And it's interesting because gifted programs actually developed because of the self-regulatory challenges that gifted learners had when they were understimulated, under-challenged in classrooms.
It's fascinating. Thank you for clarifying that. I never really looked into it. But I appreciate that information. I'm sure a lot of parents can relate. They're probably all thinking, I think my kid will do well in that.
And when we're talking about, autistic students, many autistic students are what we would consider twice exceptional, where they're autistic and also gifted, or they have ADHD, autism, and are gifted. And that's something else to consider too, is are they being appropriately challenged?
Agreed, 100%. Thank you for that. So we touched a bit about this earlier, but I feel that it's a really important point to bring up, and that is how much can a student be involved in a process. Kara, I'm going to send this one over to you because actually both you and Bruce are strong advocates on including the student in the IEP process. And I would like to give you the opportunity to elaborate on why this is so important. So Bruce, do you want to start?
Okay. This is a huge passion of mine. And in fact, if you have a look at the Education Act involving IEP processes, and I won't say I've read every province, but I've read most of them, the student is supposed to be involved. So it's supposed to be a legal requirement. So let's just put that aside, because very often there's some things in acts that are just fall through the cracks. It is so super important that the student be involved if possible. Now, there's obviously some circumstances where it's not possible, and that's fine. But the student's input, I'm going to say, is the most important, to be honest with you. When you're looking at what sort of accommodations and what sort of accessibility issues and what sort of things can be done to make the student's experience better, the person that's best at answering that is the student. And Karen and I have talked about this quite often, the triangle, that every time you're looking at any aspect of education, there's the child, there's the caregiver, and there's the educator. And those 3 points of the triangle all need to work together. The community gets involved in this as well. So I can't stress enough how important it is for the student to be involved, even if they just sit there and listen. And that's kind of a minimum aspect to it, because then what you're doing is you're including them. You're making them feel that they're included in this process, rather than it being just I want to say, I shouldn't say forced upon, but that can be the way it be. This is something I'm very passionate about. So there's my passion. Kara, do you have any? Bring your passion.
So at the very least, every child who has an IEP should be told about the IEP and told about what their rights are, what the accommodations are, have it all explained to them. I think certainly as you get into high school, you can sit down and do the IEPs with the students, talk about the goals, things like that. I'm in a bit of a unique situation in my program because my students start midway through October. IEPs are due before that. So I've worked with some of the students last year, but some are new. So I have to write the IEP goal before they start. So for my program, I make them very open-ended still. So the student will pick a goal that they want to work on for themselves is an IEP goal that I have. Probably worded better than that, but or things like that. They'll identify, they will identify situations that are stressful for them and possible strategies that they could use. So again, we are going to get to the part where they are doing those things, developing it, their self-determination, their self-advocacy skills, their awareness of what's going on in their brains and their bodies. And I think those are important things. Like goals need to really be about increasing their self-advocacy, their access to education, their communication skills, and really focused on their sort of quality of life. What is going to help them develop as full human beings? What is not about like correcting or masking. I think we talked about masking in the first, in this series. So we don't want them just conforming to fit in. We want them to be achieving things that are important to them and that lead to more equitable access.
I feel like I need to add, with every year, whether it's the triggers or whether it's the sensory processing, they evolve and they change, especially when they're starting, you know, at the age of 11 or 12, you're dealing with hormones and puberty, and what would trigger them prior to that may not be the same thing that triggers them when these changes happen. So we really need to kind of keep that in mind. As caregivers, I feel it's really important because and I've seen it with so many clients come in, and even with my oldest's IEPs, they were just photocopies of last year's and the dates were changed. And you can't, it's not a copy paste. It should change every year. The goals should change every year. And again, by including them in the process, and if you're using a strength-based IEP, as I mentioned before, it's empowering to them. They have the right to advocate for themselves, and they should also be the ones to say, and they will surprise you if they're asked, you know, how do you feel when you're in this kind of situation? You know, when the teacher is trying to teach, whether it's science and it's, oh God, I don't know what they do in elementary anymore, but I was dissecting frogs before high school, so I don't know what they're doing. Like making slime, for example. If they're in science and they're making slime, and slime is a super, it's tactile, and it could be overstimulating for the individual, or you know, it could really affect them. You want them to say, I don't like slime, or I love slime so much I could play with it like all day. So the student will be able to kind of identify their strengths and weaknesses, especially through a strength-based IEP process. And at the same time, it gives them an opportunity to tell people what they like and what they don't like. And they'll surprise you. Mine has, for sure.
My students are able to look at a list of accommodations and say, you know, this would work for me, this would not, this would work in this situation, but not in another. So students are our best resource when it comes to identifying what works for them and their brain.
It's ideal. It's ideal. All right. How should someone communicate if their needs are not being met regarding their IEP or IPP? I've had some pretty rough experiences because my oldest was nonverbal until he was, he started saying a few words at the age of 7. But at 9, maybe 8 or 9, he was throwing sentences out. And, but before then, when he was nonverbal, just as an example, he was being bullied and no one told us, and he couldn't even tell us. So there are some opportunities where, you know, these kids are not being properly accommodated for many reasons. Could very well be that, you know, whether the schoolroom, you know, the safety plan's not working for them, or the teacher doesn't have enough support, which I know is a problem right now. There is a lack of EAs and teachers, and it sounds to me like there's a lot of subs that are working in classrooms right now, which isn't necessarily fair to these kids. But there could be a lot of reasons why their needs aren't met. But the idea is, you know, how can that be communicated to the caregiver if, you know, if the student doesn't say anything? So that's a tricky one for me. But Kara, I'd like to pick your brain on this one.
This is an interesting one because sometimes students are not comfortable advocating, even when they know that they're entitled to, let's say, breaks during a test. They won't want to ask for those things. So I think part of it is the work we do early on is helping them to understand that this, you know, needing help is okay. Needing something different is fine. Everyone gets different things. We want to normalize the idea that accommodations, learning tools are for everyone, and everyone gets specific ones. And why are these particular accommodations recommended for this child? Now, sometimes you will have teachers who potentially don't know about the accommodation. So ideally, the student or the parent, depending on the student's age, can, you know, send a polite email or a phone call, a reminder, and just let them know about the IEP, because the IEP is a legal document. If it's on there, teachers are supposed to be doing those things. So I think always give someone the benefit of the doubt, and hopefully teachers do the same for parents. Give the benefit of the doubt that, you know, perhaps they just haven't had time to read and remember. You know, if they have 18 IEPs in their class, or if they're, let's say they're a French teacher or one of the itinerant subjects, they're going to have hundreds of IEPs. They won't automatically remember who is supposed to have what. So it does come down to advocacy and reminding people of the specific needs, preferably being proactive. So, you know, maybe before the first test, reminding that these are the things that benefit your child, and the student can also bring those up for themselves and mention that they have an IEP if they're comfortable doing so.
You're raising an important point about self-advocacy, and again, this is something that we can't say enough about. We were lucky that when my kids were diagnosed, I think my elder was grade 8 and my youngest was like maybe grade 5. And they already were pretty good self-advocates. And my daughter self-advocates brilliantly. And in fact, as a parent, I haven't had to do very much about this for the last 3 or 4 years, because just she is so strong about it. And I think that's the encouraging, is making sure that when the first time you have an IEP, that you should be thinking about encouraging self-advocacy at every age. And obviously, you know, the difference between a 6-year-old and a 16-year-old is amazing. It's huge. But still, a 6-year-old does have the skills to self-advocate at a somewhat level. And the other thing I want to say is, again, when this question is, it can be read so many different ways. And again, bringing the triangle up, that the communication should be between caregiver, student, and teacher as equals. In other words, the student should be encouraged, if they're having some problems, to communicate that to the teacher and the parents. And if the parent is you know, should be encouraged to talk to the teacher, etc., etc., etc.
Thank you for your feedback. That was interesting. All right, this is mine. I'm not going to read the whole thing. I have recently come over or came across a study that implicated, you know, research on, or a study on children between the ages of 2 and 10. And because of the pandemic, these kids had a missed opportunity to develop social skills as much as, or if not, you know, they didn't have that opportunity to develop the social skills as, you know, we may have as children, or before the pandemic, because these little ones were, you know, with that shutdown or lockdown, some caregivers have taken these risks very seriously, and Unfortunately, some of these children did not have, a chance to do play dates or go to parks or socialize with other children. I still know a neighbor of mine who is still homeschooling her 7-year-old and 5-year-old because of the pandemic and the fear of it possibly coming back, or who knows. So how do we advocate for these young, like this generation? And I hate to say it, and I don't like the research study called this generation the COVID kids. And I don't like that saying. I don't like that expression at all. But essentially, they were deprived from equal opportunities because of the pandemic. How do we ask for accommodation in these circumstances? How do we say, how do we push for, more opportunities for their children to socialize with their peers? And I think the next question has some, ideas on how to integrate, but essentially that's a big question. And it's tough because, there's going to be a lack of respect. And with my oldest too, who had IBI for the first 3 years of school, when he ended up being integrated in a MEP program, he had no respect for classroom environment. He didn't know how to raise his hand and wait his turn. And that was because he was, so focused on intensive behavioral intervention that he didn't understand what it was like to be part of a classroom environment. So there's a lot at stake for these little ones. And the concern is, how do caregivers push to focus on social skills and interaction, and how far behind will they be? Cara, I'm looking at you. You can't tell,
I'm just
but I'm
kind of
looking at you.
absorbing all of that. I think students who are in virtual school or homeschooling are, a unique situation. Other students are back in school where they are having these opportunities again. Students are used to having 2 months a year without school, and we don't talk about them falling behind socially during those times. So I think it's fair to bring up to a teacher and say, I'm concerned and I want my child to feel like they're part of the group. Like, how are they doing socially? Is there a way during group work you could structure it so that they don't feel lost? Like, what are you doing? And I think even if your child is in a virtual school still, asking the teacher, like, what are the opportunities to socialize? Teachers come up with some really remarkable strategies. I've seen virtual teachers who have recess with their class, where the class can go into breakout rooms and play virtual board games and have conversations and things like that. They're encouraged to talk in the chat. Sometimes you just have to talk to the teacher and say, like, what are the opportunities at the school for these? What are you noticing? And considering socializing both at the structured times, so that would be things like group work and projects with other children, and then unstructured. And if you have a child who is overwhelmed at recess, or needs breaks at recess, or gets lost, especially over the longer lunch recess, finding out what are the clubs, what are the other opportunities. Can they help out in the library or kindergarten room over that longer recess? So it doesn't necessarily have to be in the IEP. Sometimes it's just talking to the teacher, seeing what the opportunities are. But in some cases, it is on the IEP, depending on what they are seeing and who's available to support, and how comfortable the school is with if they have like social programming, or special education teacher is working with your child. Sometimes they'll have alternative goals around social.
Okay. Bruce?
This is we have talked about, Dominic and I have talked about this over the last months, and it's an interesting question. I think would loathe to bring it up in accommodation other circumstances, because I think the difference about what's happened, 2 of the last 3 years is it's society-wide. And so if you've got a child in grade 1 or grade 2, or even grade 3, actually, I have missed 2 years of that regular social social skills within a classroom. But so is every other student. So I think as a community, as an education community, it's a question that is going to be struggling with everybody. And so I would recommend.
Are they really behind?
I'm sorry, Cara, what?
And so are they really behind? And you know what? I think it's also provincially. Like, we were only online for a couple of months in 2020, and then it was sort of back to classrooms. And classrooms, you can't socially distance in classrooms. Like, so for me, it's an interesting question, because schools have been running relatively normally the last 2 years here.
Which is so interesting. In Alberta, we basically had 2 years off.
Yeah.
Fundamentally, like that's, and things like, I have a special background here just because of subjects I was working in, but like, we didn't have choir or theatre performances for 3 years. In fact, there is some kids who went to a 3-year high school who never had the chance to perform in public, just because of COVID restrictions. However, when we're talking about social skills, I think we are talking about the younger age group, and Cara, your point is everybody's behind, and that's kind of why I'd be careful about accommodation unless your child or the student is struggling with social integration anyway, if that makes sense.
And
and
a lot of that can be done at home too. Like, children learn through play. Make sure that you're playing with them at home. Create those opportunities where you can. I think a lot of homeschooling families already do this, where they connect with other homeschooling families and do trips and get together in parks, things like that. Like, realistically, the best social opportunities are often outside of school.
Yeah.
Given how much has to be covered in the classroom.
I was going towards that, making it a more community-based response. In other words, your point is exactly right. Do more things at home, but also doing more things in the community outside the school, where sometimes I think, that's where expect social skills are taught. There's other things that are taught at school. Social skills are part of it.
Thank you for clarifying. I think you've answered that question. It's still kind of, it's interesting when I do get calls, and as an example, a caregiver had their 4-year-old start in pre-kindergarten, 4 or 5-year-old start in pre-kindergarten, and the child came across as a selective mute, and automatically the caregiver thought that the child was on a spectrum, and the teacher is the one who made the point to say, if your child communicates at home, they may have some challenges in larger groups, because that age category and that early intervention, which is important, and that it just turns out that the child wasn't confident in speaking to peers and to other adults that they didn't know, because they were in such a tight little circle, for the first 3 years of their life. So that will also have an impact. It doesn't mean that they're on the spectrum. It just means that they might have some different opportunities as far as milestones.
It's a huge transition, right? And And classrooms at that level can be huge numbers. So if you go from a home environment where it's you and just your parent or parents, and you might not even have siblings, and then suddenly you're in a classroom with like 30 other children and 2 adults,
Right.
it's
intimidating.
overwhelming, right?
It's intimidating. Of course. Of course. All right.
I must share this funny story. I had my ex-brother-in-law didn't speak. Adults didn't think he spoke until he was 6 or 7, because his sister, who's a year or 2 older, would speak for him. And even when he went to school, if he needed something, he would go and get his sister. Now, he was perfectly fine. His speech skills were completely fine. It's just that he had learned that his sister could ask and tell him all the things he needed to know. So why would he need to speak? It was really quite amusing until she couldn't come to the classroom, and suddenly he was speaking, and the adults all went, "Oh."
Yeah.
And I also say, like, not everything that your child will work on or will need support with is going to be on the IEP either. You know, so some things are supported without an IEP. The IEP is just a snapshot of some of those like curricular things that are going to be covered. So you can work with teachers to support in other areas without it falling on the IEP.
So this next question kind of falls with that previous one, and this is actually something that I had to push for my oldest. While he was not in a mainstream classroom, he was in a specialized program, and he basically remained in that classroom with that same group of 5 kids for a couple of years. And when when I felt like there could be more opportunity for him to socialize, especially after doing IBI for so long, I made it a point to push in his IEP to have him be a part of those social subjects such as art or gym, recess, the lunch times. Instead of eating in his little classroom, that he can go and eat in his, the classroom of his peers of his age, just so he can kind of get to know the kids outside of that classroom. And this should come across as normalcy for some schools, but for others it's not. And I really, sadly, I had to push for this, and I insisted that they plug this in his IEP to help with the social skills. I'd like to get your thoughts on that, Kara and Bruce, on asking for this, and if you feel that it's a reasonable request.
I think you can always ask, and you should be asking, like, what are the opportunities for my child to socialize with other children, to meet other peers besides in their classroom. I love that you asked for this and you got it in the IEP. I think that's really, really an important thing to do. How feasible it is will depend on how much support your child needs, if someone's supervised, because some of these times, like lunchtime, for instance, supervision is not the greatest. There might be one hallway monitor, but not someone specifically in the classrooms for the whole time. So you would definitely want to problem solve and ask the question, like, what opportunities are available? How can we make this possible? Again, I work with students who come to me one day a week, but are in mainstream classrooms the rest of the time. So they have not had to push for this, but I certainly see value in doing this. And programs don't always have consistency in how things roll out, but I have definitely seen some programs that work very hard to integrate at different times, depending on the schedule of the program staff. Like if there's an EA to go with them to be in that art class. So ask the question, ask away.
Thank you. Bruce?
I personally, and honestly, this is just my personal opinion.
Bruce, you're cutting out. Do you want to turn off your camera perhaps for a bit? Hello.
I'm so curious what he's going to say.
That's how.
Hey, Bruce, do you want to turn off your camera? All right. We're just going to give him a second.
Right.
Can you hear me? Mm-mm. Oh, Bruce. All right.
But it does remind me too, I'm just thinking, I've had my students do reading buddies with younger students.
Yes.
I think responsibility is it's such an important thing to develop the sense that, our children are not just sort of the recipient of help, but they have things to offer and to support others as well.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Bruce, are you back?
I was going to say, hopefully I'm back. I started off saying I'm not a big fan of inclusive, taking people out of systems. In general, I understand it's got reasons, and what I can see is, again, is ask. I think that even in a segregated program in a with a school, with a elementary school, there always should be answers where activities are integrated. And I have to say, in the state that, and in fact, the schools that my kids went to in Alberta, and actually here too, they have it's from the other streams into the mainstream, or they will supervise often the students, the students from mainstream programs can help those who are not in the mainstream.
Mm-hmm.
Like a peer support program.
Yeah, like a peer support. Buddy systems.
Knowing exactly what word to use there.
Are you feeling this too, Cara?
Yes.
Okay, so Bruce, I'm not sure what's going on with your camera or your mic, but you're choppy. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next slide, Cara.
And it's something you have a student that's main.
Bruce. Hey, Bruce. Oh, there we go. We lost him. Poor Bruce.
Yeah.
I apologize, everybody. He's having some challenges with his internet, and it's been a couple of days now, so hopefully he'll work on it. Okay.
Can I just say one more thing about that question?
Of course.
I think with all of our concerns and, of course, anxieties about our children in schools, when you reach out to schools, again, you want to approach it in a way that is firm but gentle, if that makes sense. You want to ask about these. You want to say, is this possible? You don't want to, the way you say things matters, I think, and you can build bridges. And you want to also acknowledge what the school is doing well. That sometimes gets more buy-in too when you're bringing up concerns. And sometimes you'll find teachers are supporting these things in some way that you just don't know about, because your child doesn't tell you everything that's going on in the classroom. So it is really important to say, these are some things that I'm concerned about, and how do you feel my child's doing with these things, and what have you noticed? And just start it as a conversation.
Yes, absolutely. I feel like I've been very, very lucky. For my oldest, he'd been to 4 schools before he hit junior high, and he's been in the same program since grade 7, and he's now finishing his grade 12. So for that amount of time, we've been really blessed because we've had the same team, which is great. My youngest, I have no issues.
The team that works well, yeah.
Right. And then my youngest, he's had the same self-regulation. She's like a spec ed teacher. but she has this classroom where she's available anytime he needs that one-on-one, or to exert his energy, or, you know, any support. If he's overstimulated, he is now in a position where he can just leave his desk in his classroom and go and see her. And she knows him and she reads him like a book. And she reminds me, ever since day one of school this year, I'm gonna miss him. You know, it's her lot, because she's had him since he was in pre-K. So the relationships are really important. That level of respect is there, and don't be afraid to communicate with the teachers. And if anything, as you mentioned, Cara, you know, like approach them in a gentle and friendly way, because the minute you have that connection with these teachers, the stronger the relationship and trust. And that is huge. So if you can trust these teachers, and if they can trust you, and, you know, you can kind of build again, like the relationships can last, you know, for Sammy, it's been since he's 4, and now he's just turned 11. So that's a good, healthy, you know, time with the same group, and the relationship is solid. And I know that I can text, or they'll text me, they'll ask me if he's off, did he have a good night's sleep, is something going on, because something's bugging him today, and they try to work it through. So it's really important to kind of maintain those relationships.
And then with social goals too, like you also want to touch base with your child and see what they are interested in. What kinds of interactions are they interested in? Do they need recess as a break sometimes? Because often we do, because school is such an overstimulating place. Like, you want to make sure you're not forcing them to participate in things every single recess at the expense of their you know, self-regulation skills, because they might need that downtime. So again, just talking with them too about what are their goals, what are the things that are important to them, how do they want to interact with their peers, who do they like to work with in groups, you know, things like that. And anything you can let the teachers know. You know, who do they want to sit with, if there's someone that they want to sit with. That's all important information for teachers to be aware of too.
100%. So on that note, I see that Bruce is back, but Bruce, can you hear us? Can you speak? Can you?
I can hear unstable.
Yeah.
Bruce, did you have any closing comments? Oh,
I hate the internet.
No, I know. When it works, it works. When it doesn't, it really doesn't. I'm just like mindful of time. But okay, I give a few other tips too. Like when you get the IEP and you read it over, you go through, make sure that it makes sense to you, make sure that you understand what each of the goals is actually asking for, I would say. You know, sometimes it depends on the experience of the IEP writer, but sometimes people will have like vague goals that when really they should be better defined, so that everyone reading it kind of understands what the goal is and what the goal means. And this is particularly true of the alternative section. So you don't want to have something really vague like Josh is going to be respectful in the classroom, because what does respectful mean? First of all, that's not an objective term. Success needs to be described, and you also want to make sure that it's not something that is not neurodivergent affirming. If he's not being respectful, are they really meaning that the child is showing stress behaviors? In which case, a goal is probably about, a better goal would be about Josh taking breaks and learning strategies to feel calmer in the classroom. You don't want to impose goals that might be unachievable for neurodivergent students, or which are in some ways harmful. So eye contact goals, I don't usually recommend. I don't ever recommend, because a lot of autistic students will talk about it's painful to make eye contact at times, or they can't look and listen at the same time. So they can't actually process the information they're being given when there's like competing channels of information. So things like that, it's not about conforming. It is about helping the child understand themselves better as a learner and better be able to self-advocate at school.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you for that.
Actually, sorry, I hope you can hear me. Cara, let's just back a question. You said if an IEP, if a goal was Johnny needs to show more respect. Okay, that's too fluffy, doesn't give us a direct answer. What could that be replaced by? What's a better strength-based response to that?
So again, I think that's where we have to get curious as the adults around the child about what's going on in this situation. What is stressing out the child that they are now being perceived as being disrespectful? Because the disrespect is not actually the problem. It's whatever they're having difficulty coping with. So you would actually have to like roll that back, get curious, talk with the child, and then find out, okay, let's say what the teacher is characterizing as disrespect is their tone of voice. But then it's like, why are they using an abrupt tone? Are they stressed out by something? Or like, what is going on? And then it's about, okay, earlier, how can the child, manage those big feelings? What can they do so that they feel more comfortable talking to the teacher? So yeah, again, it's not jumping to conclusions about children that are, we always have to make compassionate assumptions. And I think anytime I see words like appropriate or respectful, I go, appropriate for whom? And what does that actually mean? And sometimes it's the rigidity of our expectations as adults. And we always have to ask ourselves, is what I'm expecting fair? Is it necessary? Is it achievable? Or is there any other possible way?
Bruce?
Thank you. I was thinking also things like, and you've given exactly the response in the back of my mind about that investigation process of if you're asking a student to be more respectful, what does that mean and why? Because that's going to be a trauma-based response, right? And I was more thinking things like, and here's the thing for my ADHD kids, still is difficult for them to learn to give other people space in a conversation because they want to answer the question. So it's like, so don't say that they need to be more respectful in the classroom, but perhaps Johnny is very good at sharing his opinion. He should work on allowing other people's opinions to be let through in a conversation. Something very specific like that.
Yeah, that's exactly where you can use some of those strength-based goals, where it's like Johnny will use his strong social skills to strengthen his self-advocacy skills in group work with peers by discussing roles, dividing the task, inviting others to share their ideas, things like that. You would talk to the child about, okay, love your enthusiasm, love that you have this. How can you use these skills now and also invite other people in? Right? So then again, it's strength-based. It's not saying you never do this, you never let people talk. Now teaching them explicitly and structuring it. So did everyone have a chance to participate? As a teacher, I would be, giving them roles during group work at first. I would be having them evaluate as a group. Did everyone get a chance to participate? Was everyone surveyed about what their ideas were? I would structure it. I would give them graphic organizers at first to scaffold the process and really build those skills.
And so what you're saying again is this emphasis that this process needs to be specific and have achievable goals in communication with everybody.
And the child needs to understand what you're asking them to do. And, a lot of these things are things that we should be teaching everyone, frankly, not just your child.
All right. So at this point, we are open for questions or comments. If anyone has any, feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or you can throw it in the chat. In the meantime, I'm going to basically say that these are great learning experiences for me. Although we always say that we're good at giving advice, but we're not very good at following our own. I know that I'm strong when it comes to providing feedback for families and caregivers and, teachers for that matter, when it comes to supporting a neurodivergent student. But as a mother, as a mother, and just so I'm going to get a little personal here, I suppose, but my husband is also neurodivergent. And I remember in, elementary school sitting next to him because we go back that far. And he was so annoying. He was such an annoying kid. And he was just always stimming. Now I know what it is, but back then it was just annoying. He was, very vocal, class clown, stimming all the time, whistling. I think he spent more time out in the hallway than he did in class because he was always getting in trouble.
You knew your husband as a child?
Yep. From
Wow, I
elementary
love that.
school. Yeah. And now he still stims and he still hums. But I think that looking back now, I could see how I loved that he was as expressive and open and not, if he had to stim, he stimmed. And usually it was humming or whistling, and he'd get kicked out of class because of it. But it didn't matter because he found his way to self-regulate. He just didn't necessarily understand, those boundaries as to like when and where to start whistling, just so you can decompress. But it was always funny, for my peers. And I remember, we used to laugh at him because he was a class clown. And now things are different. And I feel that these kids are so afraid to stim, or, like my youngest now, who's so much like his dad, is the complete opposite. The minute that he shows any signs of vulnerability, he hides it and he's masking and he's forced to conform. And then when he gets home, he's just so drained. And that scares me. One, he doesn't talk to adults. He only talks to his teacher and his EA. He won't talk to the lunch person, the bus driver, none of these. He doesn't talk to adults. I don't know why. If they're not at his level, he doesn't talk to them. And so it's hard for him to ask for help when there's a sub, or when there's, when his EA is not around, or whatever the case is. So he's forced to kind of keep everything locked in. And then when he gets home from school, that's when he exerts. So I guess my question is, we have someone in a waiting room. So I guess it's not really a question, but it's more of a concern when caregiver, when you're talking to your children about, how to behave in school, the first thing you want to tell them is, make sure that you're good, make sure that you listen to your teacher and that you follow the rules. But at the same token, you want to be able to tell them, make sure that you ask for help. Make sure that if your body's really busy and you need to move, ask someone, if you can, like, don't be afraid to ask, because especially when they're young, they're afraid. So these are tips I recommend as a caregiver, and it's okay to be that, that you're telling your child it's okay to ask for help, or to go and run, or to exert just ask. Because if they start masking, and I think I remember saying this in the last series, if they start masking at a young age, that can lead to so much more in their future, and it's not good. It's not healthy. Right, Cara? I'm sure that
and like, you want to be, and teachers can do this too, where you talk to students about like what works for your brain. You might need more breaks than your classmates take, or you might not even know your classmates are taking breaks. But sometimes other children ask to go to the washroom and they don't even really need to go to the washroom, but they go for a little walk and then come back. And you can do that too. And what are the things that help you focus? Does it help you to have a fidget tool in your hand? And how is it used as a tool versus a toy? We don't want them to feel bad for having these things. We want them to have an understanding of why these things are important for them, which again is why going over the IEP is a good idea too. So again, they understand the purpose of all of the accommodations, of all the tools that are available to them. Because you're right, yeah. If a child doesn't understand there's a self-regulatory benefit to stimming, and they sort of suppress their need to move, their need to get out their energy, channel their energy in those ways, how are they how are they getting out that energy? They're not until they get home and they have a meltdown, or they are just burned out.
Shut down. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah. So I encourage the caregivers to let them, just encourage them to talk to someone and let them know that they have to move, whether it's, like I said, like a walk to the washroom, or, my little one used to be able to bring a friend and go run the track a couple of times just so his brain can decompress and he can focus when he gets back. It only takes 5 minutes. It's not long. And he gets to bring a buddy. So that's kind of fun, right? So there's different ways that you can help the student or help your child self-regulate young.
Yeah, coloring sheets. There's so many things that are ways of self-regulating in the classroom.
Yeah, and that are not overly obvious either, because like my youngest, if he shows any vulnerabilities, then he's toast. He doesn't like that. He doesn't like to, to be identified, if you will. He likes to blend in with everybody else.
I advocate for free access sensory tools for the whole class, because at first there's novelty to every tool, but then eventually the ones who are using the tools are the ones who are benefiting from the tools and who really need them.
Yeah. Absolutely. Okay, well, I don't see any questions in the chat. Does anyone have any questions for Cara, Bruce, or myself? Hi, Graciela. Go ahead. I'll unmute. I don't know if she can unmute.
Can I ask the question?
Sure.
So my child, in the first time, I want to say thank you so much, because I learned so much with this space. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And the other way is my kid is almost 8, and he feels regulated in classroom when he can have all the trains in a line, in the correct order. So is that something I can ask the teacher to what is the word in English? Give me a second. Can the teacher make this for my kid? Approve this, or no, can approve this or not?
Sorry. So it is. So the trains aren't. There's a train set in the classroom and they're not in the right order. Is that?
Yes, because he go to the school with his trains, because if he don't go with the train, he don't go in the classroom. So, but he want to take the train in a perfect line in the desk. So it's something I can ask the teacher, or maybe it's too much?
I would definitely mention it to the teacher that your child, experiences anxiety if the train is not lined up. And maybe at the beginning of the day, the teacher can just give him some downtime to set up the train how he would like on the desk. Or maybe there's another spot in the classroom where it can be protected and lined up. But
perfect.
Let her know that that's a stressor. That's a stressor for your child.
Okay, thank you so much, all of you. You are amazing.
Bruce?
My grade 12 still requires, if there's any colors that she can see, they have to be in rainbow order.
Red and yellow and pink and green.
And she's in grade 12.
You know that song?
All the teachers, like, it's funny at the start, and then they go, like, it's like, it doesn't hurt anybody, so they just allow it to happen. Like, it's just a simple request. That is not, I think having need something lined up like that, that's not an unreasonable request at all. At any age level.
I don't think that anyone should hold back. I mean, if they can accommodate your child, there's no reason you can't try. You have to ask, and if you don't ask, you'll never know. And if it means, helping your child transition accordingly and self-regulate, then it's a positive tool for them to have with them, whatever that tool is. So never be afraid to make that request, or to ask the teacher, or just talk to them whenever you bring your child to school, and let them know about, these really important tools for them.
Thank you so much.
Of course, Graciela. Thank you for coming back.
Oh, I learned so much. I think I told my husband, I think I learned much more here than the other. I am involved in a lot of program, a lot of people teach me. So, but I learned so much the last time. So I will return again next time. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate that.
All right. Well, if there's no more questions, then that ends this series. Thank you, Cara and Bruce, for popping in and out. Thanks, Cara, for being here. I'm sorry, Bruce. And I hope that you all join us again for our next series, which is, oh my gosh, I don't have the date written down in front of me, in October. Bruce, do you have that information by chance?
I'm going to Instagram
Yeah.
right now. October 17th.
Okay,
Yes.
great. October 17th is our next one. The first series, I apparently was posted at one point, and then it was taken down to be edited, should be posted back shortly. And this one should follow shortly as well. So thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.